John Carter had spent 7 years chasing shadows, refusing to believe his daughter was gone. Lily Carter had vanished one bright morning, leaving behind only a single shoe and a father's shattered heart. When an anonymous photo arrived, showing a girl with familiar green eyes, hope came roaring back to life. The truth that followed would uncover a web of obsession, lies, and madness no one saw coming. And when father and daughter finally met again, the world watched as John tried not to cry. John Carter always believed that nothing bad could happen in Maplewood. It was the kind of town where everyone knew each other, where front doors stayed unlocked, and where mornings began with the soft sound of birds and the hum of school buses rolling down quiet streets. That day was no different. The sun was shining, the air smelled like fresh rain, and his daughter Lily was running late as usual. She was 8 years old, with freckles across her nose and a laugh that filled every corner of their small house. John reminded her to grab her lunch, helped her tie her shoes, and walked her to the bus stop at the corner of Oak Street. He waved as the yellow bus disappeared around the bend, not realizing it was the last time he would ever see her get on it. The morning drifted by slowly. John headed to work, sorting through papers at his desk while thinking about picking up ice cream for Lily on his way home. But just before noon, his phone rang. It was the school's number. The voice on the other end was trembling as she explained that Lily hadn't arrived that morning. John froze, the pen in his hand slipping from his fingers. At first, he thought it was a misunderstanding. Maybe she had gotten off at the wrong stop or decided to visit a friend. But as minutes turned to hours, the truth began to sink in. Lily was missing. By evening, the police were at his house, marking off the area around the bus stop with yellow tape. Reporters gathered at the end of the street. Neighbors whispered to each other, and volunteers began searching the nearby woods. John walked aimlessly, calling Lily's name into the darkening sky, his voice breaking each time. The police found her backpack tossed near the roadside ditch, a few of her pencils scattered in the dirt. One of her shoes was lying several feet away, its white fabric smeared with mud. It was clear that something terrible had happened. That night, the quiet town of Maplewood turned into a crime scene. Helicopters circled overhead, search dogs barked in the distance, and flashlights swept through the trees. John refused to leave the area. He stayed near the bus stop, shivering in the cold, waiting for someone to tell him they had found her. But every time a police car returned, the officers only shook their heads. As the night stretched on, he began to feel a hollow ache deep in his chest, feeling that told him his life would never be the same again. Days passed, and the search expanded. Rivers were checked, abandoned buildings combed, and every passing vehicle was stopped and questioned. John barely slept. He gave interviews on television, begging for anyone with information to come forward. His eyes looked empty, his voice hoarse from repeating the same plea. The community rallied around him, bringing food, organizing vigils, and offering prayers. But each sunrise felt heavier than the last. There were no leads, no witnesses, and no sign of Lily. Inside their small home, her room remained untouched. The pink curtains still fluttered in the breeze. Her toys sat neatly on the shelf, and her favorite storybook lay open on the bed. John couldn't bring himself to close it. Every night, he sat by her window, staring into the darkness, listening for the sound of her laughter. He refused to believe she was gone. Somewhere deep inside, he was certain she was still alive, waiting for him to find her. But as the days turned into weeks, and the police started pulling back their search, even hope began to sound like a fragile, fading whisper. The once cheerful neighborhood became haunted by silence. Parents held their children closer, and no one let them walk alone anymore. Maplewood was no longer the safe town it used to be. It was a place marked by fear and unanswered questions. And in the middle of it all stood John Carter, a father broken by loss, holding on to the faintest glimmer of hope that one day, somehow, his little girl would come back home. The weeks after Lily's disappearance turned into months, and time began to blur for John Carter. He no longer followed the rhythm of ordinary life. Days melted into nights, spent staring at maps, photos, and reports that offered no answers. The house that once felt warm and full of laughter had become a place of constant silence. Every corner reminded him of her empty chair at the breakfast table, the drawings still pinned to the fridge. The sound of her laughter echoing faintly in his memory. He couldn't bring himself to pack away her belongings. Instead, he made her room a shrine of hope, a place untouched by time, where he believed she might return one day and find everything just as she had left it. When the official search began to slow down, John refused to stop. He left his job, sold his car, and used the money to fund his own investigation. He printed thousands of missing posters with Lilius's face on them, each one showing her bright smile and green eyes that seemed to look straight into a person's soul. He drove from town to town, handing them out to strangers, taping them to walls, and pleading with shop owners to display them near their doors. His life had become an endless road of gas stations, cheap motels, and false leads. Every time someone claimed to have seen a girl who looked like Lily, John followed the trail, no matter how far it led. Each time, the result was the same nothing. News channels lost interest after a year. New cases replaced Lily's story. But John kept her photos on his dashboard and whispered to it each night, promising he would never give up. Sometimes, he stood by the old bus stop, staring at the road where she had vanished, as if replaying that morning might somehow change its ending. Other times, he found himself in places he didn't recognize. Mole towns, quiet highways, and endless stretches of countryside, hoping she might be somewhere out there, waiting to be found. His search took a toll on him. His beard grew long, his eyes hollowed with exhaustion, and his hands trembled when he tried to hold a cup of coffee. Friends stopped calling. Even the police gently suggested he should move on. But John couldn't imagine a life that didn't include finding her. Every year, on her birthday, he baked a small cake, lit a candle, and watched it burn down in silence. It became a ritual of hope, a way to keep her alive in his heart. Then one morning, nearly 7 years after she disappeared, a letter arrived. The envelope had no return address, just his name written in uneven handwriting. Inside was a single photograph. It showed a teenage girl sitting on a bench near a suburban gas station. Her hair was longer, her clothes simple, but her eyes, the same bright green eyes, were unmistakable. John's heart began to race. He turned the photo over and found a small note. "She's alive." For the first time in years, his hope felt real again. He took the photos to the police, who immediately began tracing its origin. The gas station in the background had a recognizable logo. Narrowing it down to a few possible locations across 2 states, investigators started reviewing security footage, searching for any trace of the girl. John couldn't sleep. He sat by the window that night, clutching the photo tightly, whispering her name. The next morning, detectives confirmed they had found a match for the station, a small town hundreds of miles away. The footage showed a teenage girl entering the convenience store with a woman whose face was partially hidden by a hat. John's breath caught as he leaned over the monitor. It was her. After all the years of emptiness and unanswered prayers, there she was alive, walking, breathing. He didn't know who the woman was or why Lily was with her. But for the first time since that terrible morning, he felt something powerful stir inside him. It was hope, fierce and unstoppable, flooding back into his life. Detectives began to dig into the mysterious photograph that had reignited the entire case. The small gas station where Lily had been spotted was located in a quiet suburban town, hundreds of miles from Maplewood. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions, where strangers came and went unnoticed. The footage from the security cameras showed a teenage girl entering the store with a woman who appeared to be in her late 40s. She wore dark glasses, a baseball cap pulled low, and never looked directly at the camera. The girl beside her seemed nervous, her movements careful, as though she'd been taught not to draw attention. When the woman paid for their items, She placed her hand gently but firmly on the girl's shoulder, guiding her out of the store. That small gesture told detectives everything. They weren't mother and daughter. Something was wrong. John Carter watched the footage over and over, his heart pounding each time. The way the girl glanced at the door, the way her fingers brushed her hair. The same way Lily always did it was her. He had no doubt left in his mind. Detectives traced the credit card used at the gas station, which led to a rental home on the outskirts of town. It was registered under the name Margaret Louise, but that identity turned out to be fake. Whoever this woman was, she had gone to great lengths to stay hidden. When the police arrived at the address, the house was empty. The curtains were drawn, the furniture was sparse, and there was no sign of anyone living there for days. Inside, officers found something chilling. In a small bedroom, there were children's drawings taped to the walls, bright crayon sketches of flowers, houses, and 2 stick figures. Holding. Each one was signed Lily. See, a few toys were stacked neatly on a shelf, and a pink blanket lay folded at the foot of the bed. The air inside felt heavy, like the space itself had been frozen in time. In a desk drawer, they found a worn notebook filled with handwriting exercises and spelling tests under a different name. Anna. It became clear that Lily had been living under a false identity, isolated from the world. There were no signs of struggle, no locks on the doors, no evidence of physical harm. It seemed Lily had not been kept prisoner in chains, but by fear. Detectives discovered prescription bottles with someone else's name on them and several expired IDs, showing the same woman under different aliases. Whoever she was, she had spent years building new lives and discarding them when they drew attention. The most haunting discovery came from a locked metal box found beneath the bed. Inside were old newspaper clippings about Lily's disappearance. Some were circled in red ink. Others had handwritten notes in the margins. It was as if the woman had been following every development in the case from the beginning. The police began interviewing neighbors, but few had noticed anything unusual. One woman recalled seeing the teenager in the yard occasionally, hanging laundry or reading by the window, but she never spoke to anyone. Another neighbor mentioned hearing the woman's strict tone through the walls, scolding the girl for leaving the curtains open. The descriptions painted a picture of quiet control, not violence. The woman had created a world where Lily was safe but also trapped. John's emotions swung between relief and rage. He wanted to run to the town himself, to search every street, every house. But detectives urged patience. They were closing in carefully, determined not to spook the suspect. The search for the mysterious woman stretched across multiple states as authorities pieced together her past. Then, just as they thought they were getting close, she vanished. A neighbor reported seeing a moving truck outside the rental house a day before police arrived. The woman and the girl were gone again. But one clue remained: a receipt from a small diner left on the kitchen counter, dated the same day she disappeared. It gave the investigation its next direction. The receipt showed a location less than 30 miles away, and cameras there caught a glimpse of the same woman and the same girl sitting at a corner table. The trail was alive again. After years of darkness, the faint light of truth was beginning to break through. The investigation into the woman's identity began to unravel a story far more twisted than anyone had imagined. Detectives traced her fingerprints to old state records, and a name emerged from the past to Bellinbrooks. She wasn't a stranger after all. Years ago, she had been distantly related to John's ex-wife, someone who had attended family gatherings long before Lily was even born. Back then, Evelyn had seemed quiet, harmless, and kind. But beneath that calm surface lay a history of instability. She had lost custody of her own child after a mental health crisis and had vanished from everyone's lives soon after. It now appeared she had resurfaced years later, consumed by grief and delusion, and had set her sights on Lily as a replacement for the child she had lost. Through interviews and old records, investigators pieced together her movements. She had been living under false names across several states, often renting small houses in quiet neighborhoods where no one would ask questions. She worked odd jobs, paid mostly in cash, and kept her distance from others. Each time she felt someone growing suspicious, she would pack up and move overnight. It explained how Lily had stayed hidden for so long. The woman was careful, methodical, and obsessed with control. Detectives found journal entries in Evelyn's handwriting from years before the kidnapping. They revealed the depth of her obsession. She wrote about seeing Lily at a family gathering when the girl was a toddler, how she reminded her of the daughter she had lost, how she belonged with her. The entries grew more unstable over time, describing plans to rescue Lily from what she imagined was an unhappy home. For Evelyn, the kidnapping had never been an act of violence in her mind. It was her way of creating the life she thought she deserved. Lily's life in captivity had been one of quiet isolation. Evelyn had moved them constantly, changing towns and identities whenever she felt threatened. Lily was homeschooled, taught under a new name, and told that her real parents had abandoned her. Every trace of her former life was erased. The walls around her were lined with stories about a dangerous world that would hurt her if she ever tried to leave. Over the years, Lily grew to believe that Evelyn was her only protector. The control wasn't through force, but through fear and manipulation, leaving no visible scars, only confusion and silence. The discovery of the diner receipt gave police their breakthrough. Surveillance footage confirmed that Evelyn and Lily had stopped there just days earlier. Detectives swarmed the area, showing Lily's photo to employees and nearby residents. One waitress remembered the girl clearly. She said Lily seemed quiet, always looking toward the door as if waiting for someone. Evelyn had paid in cash and kept her head down, avoiding conversation. When the waitress saw a news report about the case later that night, she called the tip line immediately. That single call led authorities to a motel 20 miles from the diner. When police arrived, the door was locked, but the curtains were open. Inside, they found a note written in shaky handwriting. "She's safe now. Don't hurt her." Evelyn was gone, but Lily was there sitting silently on the bed, staring at the floor. Her hair was longer, face pale, but it was unmistakably her. Officers moved carefully, speaking softly so as not to startle her. She didn't resist when they guided her outside. It was as though she didn't fully understand what was happening. A paramedic handed her a blanket, and for a long time, she didn't say a word. But when she was shown a recent photograph of John, her eyes filled with tears. She nodded slowly, whispering his name for the first time in years. The long nightmare had finally broken. As police secured the scene, they received reports that Evelyn's car had been found abandoned near a forest road a few miles away. Inside were forged IDs, cash, and several maps marked with potential hiding places. Despite an extensive search, Evelyn herself was never found. Some believed she took her own life. Others thought she escaped once again, living under another name. But for John, the only thing that mattered was that Lily had been found alive. After 7 years of grief and searching, his daughter was finally coming home. News of Lily's rescue spread quickly, turning the quiet town of Maplewood into a place filled with reporters, flashing cameras, and whispered prayers. After 7 years of searching, John Carter was finally going to see his daughter again. He arrived at the recovery center where she was being kept under medical supervision, his hands trembling as he held the small pink teddy bear she used to sleep with as a child. The building smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee, but to John, it felt like sacred ground. He had imagined this moment countless times, how she would look, what he would say, but now that it was here, words seemed impossible. Every breath felt heavy with both relief and fear. He didn't know if she would remember him, or if the years apart had erased the bond they once shared. When he was finally allowed to see her, the world seemed to slow. The door opened, and a young girl stepped inside the room. She was taller, thinner, and her eyes carried a sadness far beyond her age. For a second, John couldn't move. He just stared, afraid that if he blinked, she might disappear. Then she looked up, and for the first time, their eyes met. It was as if time folded in on itself, erasing the 7 empty years between them. John tried to speak, but his throat tightened. The teddy bear slipped from his hand and hit the floor softly. His lips trembled as he struggled to hold back tears. He had promised himself he wouldn't cry in front of her, that he'd be strong, but the sight of her alive shattered every wall he had built to survive. Lily didn't run into his arms like he had dreamed. She stood still, uncertain, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater. She had spent years living under lies, and trust was something that had to be rebuilt, not assumed. Slowly, John knelt down to her level, keeping his distance, letting her see the father who had never stopped looking for her. The silence between them was filled with 1,000 unspoken words. Loss, fear, hope. Then, almost imperceptibly, she took a small step forward. Another. And then she wrapped her arms around him. It was a quiet, trembling embrace, fragile but real. John buried his face in her shoulder, and despite his efforts, tears streamed down his cheeks. Cameras captured the moment, but in that instant, the world around them disappeared. In the days that followed, Lily began the slow process of remembering who she was. Therapists worked with her to help her adjust to a world she no longer knew. She had lived most of her childhood behind closed doors, her memories reshaped by another person's lies. John stayed by her side through every session, every sleepless night, every tearful breakdown. He never pressured her to talk, never asked for explanations. He only reminded her, again and again, that she was safe. Bit by bit, her laughter began to return. The sound was quieter than he remembered, but it was enough to fill the silence that had haunted him for years. The story spread online, and the reunion video titled "Dad Tries Not to Cry When Kidnapped Daughter is Found" went viral within hours. Millions watched as the father who never gave up finally held his daughter again. Strangers around the world wrote letters of support, sending gifts and messages of hope. For many, it was a story of faith, rewarded, of love that refused to fade. But for John, it was simply the moment his life had meaning again. Months passed, and life slowly began to find its rhythm. Lily enrolled in therapy and later started attending a small school where she could rebuild her confidence. She was still quiet, often lost in thought, but there were moments like when she painted, or when she walked through the garden that reminded John of the little girl who used to chase butterflies in their backyard. The house that had once been filled with silence now carried the sound of healing. One evening, John found her sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. She was holding the same pink teddy bear he had brought to their reunion. When he sat beside her, she leaned her head against his shoulder. No words were needed. The world had taken so much from them, but it hadn't taken everything. Somewhere deep inside, the bond between father and daughter had survived the years of darkness. And though the road ahead would be long, John knew one thing for certain: love had brought her back, and it would keep her safe forever.